Well, good afternoon if you are on the East Coast of the United States. Good morning if you are on the West Coast of the United States. Good evening if you are somewhere in Europe, perhaps, for example, in Copenhagen or Denmark. And good overnight wherever you are in the rest of the world. It is Friday. That makes me Fred Plotkin on Friday. And every week I have wonderful, inspiring guests. Some of them you know well, some of them you may not know well. But the common denominator is that all of them have inspired me, in some cases, like today's guest, for a very, very long time, which is not to say that he's old, he's not, but he started doing his inspirational work very, very young. I'm going to try to pronounce it with the best Danish pronunciation that I can. Mikael Melbye, known outside of Denmark as Mikael Melbye. Michael is a Danish Renaissance man. He is an opera singer of world renown. He has made magnificent recordings and done hundreds of wonderful performances as baritone. He has also worked with great distinction as a stage director, and he's one of the most famous painters in Denmark, and not just Denmark. And so we're going to talk about all of those things. Michael, welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Fred, and I'm delighted to be here.
So I want to explain to our listeners that you and I have known each other a very long time, but we have almost never seen one another. It's one of those particular friendships that was founded on an early mutual understanding and appreciation of many similar things. But I've been off doing all my stuff, and you've been off doing all your stuff. And we've overlapped maybe 2 or 3 times through the decades, but I think I met you around 1984, if I remember, 83, 84, 85.
Okay.
So that's
right.
35 years of friendship. And tell me, I'm not looking for a compliment, but tell me why you remain my friend, if you know what I mean. What is it about this nature of this friendship that seems to keep us connected when we've not seen each other in more than 15 years?
Well, I love interesting people and bright people, and you are certainly both. So
well, thank you. As I said, I was not looking for a compliment, but I'm just interested in the quality of friendship and how friendship works. There are people who are together every day of their lives for forever, from childhood all the way up to the end of life. And then there are other people, and I count you as one of those. We've been in the same space maybe 5 or 6 times over the course of our friendship, but we communicate a lot and we're aware of each other's work, and we seem to have a shared sensibility about aesthetics and music and other things. And that's much of what we're going to talk about today. But where do I begin with you? I want to begin. No, I know where I want to begin. It's a chapter in your life that I didn't experience, but I've been wondering about in general, namely Hamburg. IDAGIO is Berlin-based, and we have a lot of German-speaking listeners. And we, for the most part, my other guests have spoken of Berlin, Salzburg, Vienna, Munich, other German-speaking cities of Frankfurt, but I'm very aware that the big one that we've left out for no good reason is Hamburg. It's a big publishing center. It is where Das Opernglas, the German opera magazine, is published. It has, in my experience, the best audience I know outside of New York for Broadway musicals.
That's true, yeah.
And so let's start with that. Why is that?
Well, I think the Hamburg people have always been very educated, and there was very good and professional teams, both in the opera house, but also in the Operettenhaus, which was where most of the musicals came along. But there were, in the 80s, where I started down there were quite a lot of funds. One thing that was that came in handy, our director at the opera was the conductor Christoph von Dochnani, and his brother was the mayor of Hamburg. And so there was, I don't know if they did a little something like this, but we were very well served. And I mean, of all the many performances I did at the Hamburg State Opera, I was there for almost 3 seasons before I sort of left. There was not a single evening where we didn't have a Placido Domingo, Gwyneth Jones, or Pavarotti, or whoever, and wonderful conductors and fantastic directors. And for a young singer, I was only 26 when I started down there. That is an incredible education, you know, and it has made a very, very stable foundation for my later career to have worked with all these people, and also I think obtained from them the tenacity and the work ethics that they all have had. So it's a period in my life that I look back on with very, very big warm feelings.
And how is it that you wound up there from Denmark? What was the...
Well, it's a funny story, actually. I was singing Otone in the Royal Danish Opera, and Christoph von Dohnanyi, who was married to, and that's where the curtain came down.
Not Anya Celia.
Yes, Anya Celia.
Okay.
Thank you. Had a summer house in Sylt, which is very close to Denmark. And the performance from the Royal Danish Opera was broadcast. And he saw me in it and called me the day after and said, well, Mr. Melbye, would you like to come and sing in Hamburg? And obviously I nearly fainted, because that was the ultimate dream for me, to come and take part in this fantastic house. And he invited me down for an interview, not for an audition, because he was apparently quite happy with what he had seen. And it turned out that what he wanted to know was how good was my German, because the first part I did down there was Papageno in Achim Frei's very famous Zauberflöte. And so I came, you know, armed with my school German, doing the very best I could do, but he apparently thought that it was adequate for the part.
Hamburg, the Staatsoper in Hamburg, is famous for its, I think it was Rolf Lieberman was the sort of brilliant intendant, and Hamburg has a particular style of theater, and by theater I mean the state opera, not Schauspieler. And with that, the productions were sometimes considered out there, but a lot of times they were considered very modern but very intelligent.
Yeah,
and
many singers theater started in the 80s down there.
Yeah, so talk about concept theater and how you came to know it and participate in it.
Well, thank God that also the Danish opera had done some of these rather out there, as you call them, productions. I started with the Barber of Seville, actually. It's a correction from before. That was the first role, which was a very sort of classic production. And then came Achim Frey, who is a German painter, and he originated from the Die Jungen Wilden, which was very wild, to tell you the truth. And we had an extremely long rehearsal period of 12 weeks. And, you know, when the production sort of presents the sets and the costumes and everything, there were quite a few of very, very high brows at the time. And I was like, oh, I was a little bit sad that the first magic flute I had to do was not a classic one, but I must say that I changed my mind on the way. The way he saw theater and was much more imaginative and much more metaphorical, and it was absolutely a fantastic 12 weeks to work with him. And I was quite choppy at the time. And he said to me, well, you're going to fall a lot and you're coming in on like Tarzan, you know, on the ropes and stuff like that. So I was polstered. I looked pretty much like an Easter egg, and thank God for that. But during the 12 weeks of rehearsal, always in this enormous, you know, suit with cotton inside it, I think I lost about 6 or 7 kilos simply just because I was wearing this. But it was a fantastic, and it sort of, it turned into be a kind of family affair, because all of the people involved, wonderful singers. Judith Blegen was Pamina, Rüdiger Wohlers did a fantastic Tamino, and we had Kurt Moll as Sarastro. You know, it was very, very high quality. It was Christoph von Dochnani who conducted it himself. And he's a very intellectual musician, which suits Mozart very well, according to me. So it was a very nice ball that you could sort of give to the public, and they loved it.
So here's a question I've never asked you. When you say that Mozart benefits from an intellectual approach, I'm going to pair that a bit. Do you think the German language Mozart benefits more than Italian language Mozart to that approach, or is it across the board?
I think it's across the board. I think it's probably more evident when the language is German, because the German language is a little bit more square than the Italian one. But if you sort of analyze all the Mozart operas, there is an enormous amount of metric things in them. And of course, Magic Flute is the one non plus ultra in this sense. And I think that the way that you have to steer your way through that score is benefited a lot from a very bright conductor, because he would know exactly what to do with what scene and so on.
So if I remember, you had a lovely place near the Ulster Lake, the Ulster See in Hamburg. And I gather that you started painting on the walls because
that's
you are
right. Oh, you remember that? That's amazing.
That's right. Yeah. And talk about life in Hamburg, because life in Hamburg is really kind of wonderful. And it's less known, I think, than the more famous touristic cities. Hamburg is it's a very large city, but it's not the city people first think to go to in Germany. And yet, artistically, politically, and I don't mean left or right, but I mean there's an openness about Hamburg and the people of Hamburg, whether they are on the left or on the right, that is very congenial. It's a very pleasant place.
Yeah, it is.
So,
I think when you talk to Scandinavians about going down from Haparanda and going down, the first real capital you arrive to is neither Stockholm nor Copenhagen, but it's Hamburg.
Yeah,
that's a big intercontinental city with an enormous platform for art of all kinds, music, and also, you know, paintings and sculptures. There's a lot of fashion there.
Yeah,
you can get fantastic clothes in Hamburg, very expensive, but very nice. And of course, the location of the Innen Alster and the Außen Alster with a huge lake, which is almost 7 miles around, and all the channels in the mid-city, the old city, it's very charming. You know, I mean, there are lovely walks around, also the Elbe, the river that goes, and it's one of the biggest harbors in Northern Europe, and it was also then.
When you said Scandinavia, it triggered a thought that Hamburg was part of what we call the Hanseatic League, along with cities such as Bergen, and was Copenhagen one of those as well?
I think so.
Yeah.
I mean,
and all over Scandinavia, plus the east coast of the United Kingdom, plus Hamburg. And these were trading ports, but the Hanseatic League also had a certain kind of openness, I would say, that in terms of promoting business, but also belief in art.
Yeah.
So that when you go to a place like Bergen in Norway, you have markets, but you have, Edvard Grieg was from there. I think it's something about these seaside towns or cities that makes them very different from inland cities that just
they have a lot of visitors the whole time.
They do, but also they've always had exchange of products and ideas and languages. I have friends in Hamburg whose English is really British English, and not because they have a fascination with Britain, but because there's that natural link. And it's very special. I wish I could go there more. One time you were not there, I saw the Broadway musical 42nd Street. And the crowd, number one, the American performers performed better than they did in New York because of the Hamburg audience, but the crowd went wild. And in ways that it was not an automatic standing ovation, but they knew all the music. And because their English is so good, they got all the jokes.
Exactly.
In Munich, they don't always get the jokes.
No.
I love Munich, but they don't always get the jokes.
That's what I said before also, that the audience is very educated. And they read up on the stuff, when they want to see the ring cycle, they go in there and they learn it, and of course they will get more out of it in the end than the ones that just go in to see it.
So when you left your residency in Hamburg, your working residency, you became an independent artist, very much in demand. And soon after that, I saw you, but I don't think we interacted on that visit. I was in Aix-en-Provence in 1984, and you were the Barber of Seville with a really good cast. What struck me about the cast was it was sort of mostly European and Europe's best, but not traditional casting always.
Not
so
really.
There was,
no,
it was not the most Italianate cast at all.
No, it wasn't.
But you had, and I want to pronounce your name correctly, Eva Podvesh, people say Eva Poodles, the contralto from Poland, who was then fantastic. A young artist. And frankly, I was there to hear her because 3 months later, she was coming to the Metropolitan Opera for her debut, and I needed to hear her because I was going to be working with her. And so there you were, and we didn't get a chance to meet up that time. Robert Gamble was an American in the cast. We'll talk about Robert. Wonderful tenor whose career evolved in so many different directions. The Basilio I knew already from working with him, the fantastic José Van Damme. And the Bartolo was Jules Bastin, a Frenchman. And the conductor was Gianluigi Gelmetti. And the mise en scène was Roberto De Simone. So yes, you had Italians in the pit and directing, but it was a very international cast, and it had I remember thinking, this really feels more like Beaumarchais than Rossini, because the play was obviously based on Le Barber of Seville by Beaumarchais. And it had such, and maybe you disagree with me, and that's fine, a very strong French sensibility. And it was more irony than
perfumed. It was much more perfumed than the other barbers that I had done, and also more stylized in the acting style. It was more choreographed than what I had been used to, and we all had to get used to that fact. Actually, I had the pleasure, I think, as the only one in the cast, to proceed to do it also in Marseille and at the San Carlo in Naples, and it sort of evolved slightly on the way, and things were changed, but also because of the different casts that we had. In Marseille, it was very French because it was almost a full French cast. And I think they sort of leaned on the fact that they were, performing something which was initially written by a Frenchman, and I'm quite sure of that, actually.
The French think everything good was written by a Frenchman or cooked by a Frenchman or painted by a Frenchman. And I love France, but I mean, other people did good things too.
Absolutely.
So suddenly this came to my mind. I'd not planned it, but you being Danish, one of the most famous Danish films is Babette's Feast, which is really about an evocation of French cuisine and French culture and so on. Mm-hmm. Denmark, in my experience, and I love Denmark and I've been there a lot, and I just sort of something I hadn't even planned to talk to you about, but we'll talk about him. My first contact with Denmark was as an 8-year-old, but in New York City, because our very close family friend, I don't think I've ever told you this, was the Danish tenor and later baritone Axel Schütz.
Oh, yeah.
And he was a very close friend of our family. And I cooked for him and his wife, Gerd. And they were part of our household here. When they were in New York, they were with us. So I relatively had a lot of exposure to being Danish and Danish taste and Danish humor quite early on. And Axel Schütz, for people who don't know him, did, I would say, incomparable recordings of Lieder in the 1940s and early 50s. Yeah. And then he had a form of cancer, I forget if it was mouth or his throat, that required surgeries and completely changed the look of his face, but also the sound of his voice. Yeah. And he sang baritone music after that and became a very fine teacher. And by the time I met him, it was after the cancer surgery. And so he always said, well, Fred, you have to come to Denmark. And so it was always a goal to do that. And I wanted to anyway. But what has struck me about Denmark specifically is, and I don't think everyone knows this, I compare it to Vienna or Austria. I compare it to St. Petersburg. I compare it to Paris, in that Copenhagen was an imperial capital. Mm-hmm. In a way that you don't, Madrid was too, but a different kind of empire. Mm. In a way that people don't know it. They think of it as sort of Scandinavian modern. They think of Danish design. They think of Danish food now as sort of edgy food. I think of it differently. But Copenhagen, though a small city in a physically small country, had Norway, had Greenland, had islands in the Caribbean. It was a colonial power and it was an imperial power. Yeah. And therefore, everything had a royal attachment. And the opera house, the theater, was the Royal Theater. And one time I worked in the Royal Theater, you were elsewhere, which is why I didn't see you when I was working in Copenhagen. Mm-hmm. And then I worked in the new opera house we'll talk about. But the old Royal Theater is a beautiful small theater. Yeah. I think it had 800 seats. And what's very particular about it is that in most of the opera world and the theater world, when we talk about stage right, stage left, house right, house left. In that theater, it was the king's side and the queen's side.
Oh, the ladies' side.
Ladies' side, I'm sorry.
The ladies in waiting that was sitting over there.
And where did the queen sit? I was always told it was king's side and queen's side.
Stage right.
That's what I mean.
She's stage right. And the ladies in waiting and the ones that accompanied the cart was on the box opposite, stage left.
So where would the king be?
Also stage right.
Stage right. Okay, so that was like the royal box.
That's the royal box, yeah.
I see. Because it had been told to me as the king's side and the queen's side, but maybe they meant the ladies in waiting. I understand. Yeah. And therefore, the box was not a central royal box like Milan or Munich.
No, but it was. But there is a specific reason for that.
What is that?
Because people cannot turn their back to the regent. So they couldn't sit in front of him or her and sit in, downstairs, because they would eventually have to show their back. So the most front part would be the one where the royal box is. So that's the reason why it's there. It's a terrible place to sit because she can only see about 2/3 of the stage.
Well, I don't know if you know that the Royal Opera House in London, there's something called the Bedford box, which belonged to the Duke of Bedford and now to people I am very fond of. But the next box over was where Queen Victoria sat. And what she did was she sat with her back against the wall abutting the Bedford box and looked out at her subjects, not at the stage. They installed a mirror in front of Queen Victoria so that she could see the stage, but she could watch her subjects and they could see her when she wanted to be seen. Sometimes she revealed the curtain, sometimes she did not. She loved opera and ballet and went 3 times a week. But what I want to get back to with Denmark is Denmark, or Copenhagen, like Paris and like St. Petersburg, and lesser in London, but really Paris and St. Petersburg, had, in addition to a musical and operatic tradition, a remarkable ballet tradition.
Yeah. Very early.
And when I worked at the Metropolitan Opera, we would have visiting companies that I was responsible for. And one of them was the Royal Danish Ballet. We had Paris Opera, we had the Kirov, then Mariinsky, Bolshoi, of course. But Copenhagen is a beautiful but modest city, and by modest I mean it doesn't try to look extravagant.
No, it's true.
But it's a beautiful city and a very comfortable, livable city. But you can feel the royal roots and you can feel the imperial concept of Copenhagen. Did you grow up as a young man experiencing that, or was it you were just Danish?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think probably when you're rooted there, it's not so much something that you think about. But I would say that all of the Danes, also the young ones, are very, very fond of the royal house. And there is a very close, and have always been a very close connection from the people to the royal house and vice versa, other way around. And it's only recently, actually, that we've had to have, Secret Service guarding the royal family. And it's not even all of them that have it. It's only the ones closest to the throne. And I can remember very clearly from my youth that, strolling down what we call Strøget, you call it Stroget, I think, the
shopping street where George Jensen is.
You would actually sometimes bump into the Queen just walking down the street because she wanted to go to Ilum or Magasin, and buy something. And that's wonderful. Her grandfather, Christian X, who was king during the war, defied the Germans by staying, first of all, in Copenhagen, and he insisted also every morning to go on his horse and go for his ride around alone in the city, and he would be followed by a lot of cyclists and cheering people, so it was good for morale, I think, and they're very good at that.
Axel Schütz would not brag about this, but Axel Schütz during the war would go out every night and sing Danish music in the streets so that people would hear music.
Yeah,
which was a great thing.
There were some, it was huge organizations with tens and thousands of people, and he would sing the Danish songs. And it's very strange because it must be something generic with the Danish people, because during the COVID pandemic now, another wonderful person who's actually not a singer, but a conductor and composer, Philip Faber, has had the same thing in the television. And every morning he would take a Danish song and sing it together with whoever wanted to join in. And it was wonderful. You feel proud, and I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And the Danish songbook, which is a big brick of a book, was #1 on the bestseller list, which I think is really wonderful.
So something I want to know, because I've been told it, but I didn't really witness it. I was told that Queen Margareta, is that how I pronounce it?
Yeah.
Loves the backstage life of theaters and scenic design and moving sets and so on. Did you ever encounter her doing that kind of work?
Oh, absolutely. Funny enough, at a certain time, we were both employed by the theater to do a stage design. She did a ballet and I did an opera, and we would very, very often meet each other at, in the tailor's shops or in the wood shops or whatever. And she would be very, congenial and say, so what are you doing today? I said, well, I have my first costume rehearsal. Well, good luck to you. I mean, she really liked that.
Since you mentioned stage design, I'm going to gradually ease toward the visual arts, but not too quickly. What are some of the operas that you've designed?
Oh, God. I started with Così fan tutte, which was also the one that I debuted in many years before that. It's an opera that I've done an enormous amount of time. The story was that we were in between artistic directors in Denmark, and I was sort of not employed, but I was used as a gray eminence, as a consultant behind the seats. And we had an intermediate director at the moment. He was from the orchestra, and so he came to me and presented his first season, which was rather bombastic. It was big stuff, big to his liking. And I said, maybe you should have a little bonbon for the yeah, but the budget is. I said, I wager you that I can do Così fan tutte for about $100,000. And at this point of the evening, I went to the kitchen and went for another bottle of red wine and let him, stew a little bit. And when I came back, he said, all right, you're on. But when you reach that number, the box is closed. That's it. And so that was my initiation into stage design and also stage direction. And what happened then was that we had an English artistic director come in, and she liked it. She liked it very much and asked me whether I would want to do more of that. And I said, absolutely. I was sort of coming to the end of my active career anyway. And I thought it would be a wonderful, smooth transition to do something in theater with the things that I love most, but gradually, So she said, well, I don't have anything for you next year, but we would like very much to do Torvalds, which had at that point never been done in Denmark before. And I was like, oh, goody, because that was, it sort of fired off all my antennas and fantasy and stuff. And I had a long time to prepare it. So I had even prepared a travel to Beijing to sort of suck in the Forbidden City and all of these things. And then in the middle of this thought process, she called me and she said, how far are you with it? I said, well, everything is up here pretty much. Well, she had a contract with, I think, the Mariinsky Theater to do a co-production, and it was the invisible city of Kitesh.
Yes.
By Rimsky-Korsakov. And apparently it had become so expensive that the Royal Danish Opera couldn't, pay for it. So she said, which means that we now have a whole next season. Could you do it by then? And I said, yeah, sure. And she said, I asked her, when do you want it? Yesterday. And I was like, oh my God. And I said, well, if you pay for an assistant for me, I think we can get it. And we did.
Did you know that opera already?
Yeah, I had sung Ping
Okay. No,
already.
I mean the Invisible City of Kitesh.
No, that one I didn't know. That
Okay.
one I
No,
didn't.
Turandot we know.
Torvalds I knew very
Yeah.
well. Yeah. And so that was sort of my first breakthrough, and it was very well received, and it sort of also was heard of internationally. So I all of a sudden I got jobs from all over the place. But Turandot was a wonderful thing to do.
Did you paint the sets? And I ask this because other visual artists I've known or have been near, such as Marc Chagall and David Hockney, would, when I was at the Met, come to the Met and paint. At that time at the Met, not now, unfortunately, the new Metropolitan Opera House, which opened in September 1966, had what we called the paint bridge.
Yeah.
Because for listeners to know, a lot of times scenery hangs from battens, from rods, and is brought in and out. But often there are floor mats that are the size of the stage that may be carpeting, may be represent marble like in Simone Boccanegra, but they have to visually, you'll explain better than I, but the perspective has to be so that if you're in the balcony of the auditorium or the ground floor of the auditorium, have the same eye view.
Yeah.
And the paint bridge at the Met was such that Chagall, I remember, and Hockney would stand in one place and the bridge would move up and down and they would paint always at eye level in front of them. Whereas other painters would come in and lay, we had a large room the size of the stage, and the canvas would be on the floor and they would paint with very long brushes from afar. How did you work?
Most of my work was quite architectural. Before I started my singing career, I was dead set on being an architect. So when finally I got the possibility to create three-dimensional rooms, I wanted definitely to do three-dimensional stuff. However, I have done a number of very classic ballets. I did a Giselle for San Francisco Ballet, and of course that is a painted set.
Yeah.
And it's quite what should I call it? It's a challenge to do it because you know that you have to do it very well in order for the personnel, the painters, the stage painters, to read what it is you want. There is a certain degree of realism, but of course you can't sit with two hairs on the brush and do every single little leaf and stuff like that. And I had to study this. I was lucky because when I started out at the Opera House at the age of 16, I was a dresser for helping them to put on their costumes for a group of dancers whose corridor ended in a little staircase that went into the paint shop at the Royal Danish Opera. And I was very, very curious to see how they did this. So I went up there and was looking at them walking on the forest, basically, and painting the leaves with, as you say, very long, and to the point where the director of the paint shop eventually said, instead of gawking at us, I mean, I need somebody to paint leaves on this tree over here. Here's the brush here. There are these three greens. Just go and do it, And that was my baptism in painted scenery. So I got to do some real stuff at the very end. But that also made me think about it in a different way when I finally had to do the sets, the small model in 1:20 or 1¼ inch. After many years after this.
So I just learned something else about you that you and I have in common. We both began working in opera houses at the age of 16. I in Chicago, even though I'm a New Yorker, but my first work was at the Lyric Opera of Chicago. And therefore, we've been at this for a while.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is, having begun young, we have seen productions, we've heard singers that people our age would not be expected to have seen and heard or worked with in some
Absolutely.
cases. And that's,
Yeah.
I mean, I met Tito Gobi when I was 16, and he later became my teacher. So that's lucky.
I have a nice story about Tito Gobi.
Please tell me any Tito Gobi story. I love.
When I was in the conservatory, there was a summer where I thought, I need to go to Italy. I need to plug in my artistic brain in Italy. And I went to Fiesole, which is above Firenze. And I was in a sort of boarding house there, and just to suck in the whole thing and the art scene and the Uffizi, all of the museums and so on and so forth. And I remember one afternoon, I was sitting on the terrace having a drink of some sorts, and I heard opera music down the hill. And I was like, is that a radio? No, they were stopping and repeating and things. And I was like, I want to see what this is. So I went down the hill, and there was this farm. And I sort of peeked around the corner, and there was a group of singers, some of which I actually sang with later. Gösta Winberg was one of them.
Sure. Tenor.
Yeah. And they were rehearsing Rigoletto. It was a kind of opera academy, and Tito Gobi was the Meister. And somebody, saw me peeking around and got me. And I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't want to disturb. And so, what are you here? I said, well, I'm studying singing at the conservatory in Copenhagen. And I was immediately given the role of Ciprano, which has two lines, But that was an incredible experience. And then
remember what year that was?
Excuse me?
What year that was?
Oh God, that was 1973, I think.
I was in that same room in 1976. Darn, we could have met then.
Yeah.
That's where I studied. I know the place intimately well that you're describing.
Yeah.
Another thing that you and Tito have in common, apart from being wonderful baritones, is he was not an artist at your level, but he drew and painted did caricatures, not for public display, but to work through his character's makeup, gesture, atteggiamento, he called it, which is a certain kind of behavior, comportment, the way the nose would look for a certain character. He drew them all out. And
Caruso was also a wonderful
Caruso
character.
was definitely, yeah. Well, what we know about Caruso is the Metropolitan Opera was on tour in San Francisco in 1906 when the huge earthquake hit in San Francisco. Right. And they had more than 20 productions with them, most of which were destroyed. They traveled by train at that time. And Caruso panicked, and he hired someone, with a rowboat to row him across the East Bay to take him to Oakland, to get away from San Francisco, because in San Francisco it's not only the destruction caused by the earthquake, but the fires that happen after. And Caruso drew, painted, sketched a lot of the imagery that we have of San Francisco from that time. Those drawings are mostly in San Francisco.
Oh, I've never heard about this.
Yeah, but my favorite story from that period is that the soprano, the very heavy, beautiful soprano Luisa Tetrazzini, was in San Francisco. And while Caruso, she said, Vigliacco, coward, as he went across the bay, she said, I stay, I cook. And she made she took whatever food she could find, and she just cooked and fed people in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake.
Well, that's an Italian mama for you.
And because she was a large lady, and she loved her food, and there were no issues for her. I love my food, and that's it. She said, I stay, I cook. But yes, there's something, it seems, about certain baritones and painting and drawing. You at a different level than those other two. Oh no, Caruso was not a baritone, sorry. But so we went off in that direction. We were talking about design. I wanted to ask you, have there been, and if so, which ones were productions that you designed where you also knew that you would direct? And if you knew that you were going to direct, did you design them with that in mind?
Well, it was it was very strange because in Copenhagen, where it all started, they got a good deal because I would design, direct, do the lights, the costumes, and I would probably also sing one of the lead roles, you know, and they wouldn't pay me very much for that at the start. And so that was sort of my package for a long time, actually, when I also ventured outside of Copenhagen or Denmark. And to a certain point where all of a sudden I felt that I was working too hard and I sort of had to delegate some of it out. But I usually always did the stage design and the directing.
So how did one, as you were planning and thinking about a production, you can pick whatever one you want to pick as the example. How did your ideas about how it would be staged inform how you designed it, or did the ideas come first in design?
No. It all comes at the same time, actually. I think when you start with either things that you already knew or something that you had to study anew, you sort of have the possibility that most directors or stage designers for that don't have, to sort of build everything up parallel to one another. And that's it's a wonderful gift, because you don't have to do any compromise. You know that thought that you are going to give the soprano will be, you know, underlined with whatever the stage design is, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, you're alone with your nightmares. You know, you don't have a sparring partner, and sometimes you go for very, very long walks in the woods and go, oh, I can't do this. You know, so there are pros and cons for it all, but absolutely they grew together.
Did you ever know and perhaps work with either Franco Zeffirelli or Pierluigi Pizzi?
Yes, I did, both of them, actually.
Talk about those experiences. I mentioned them because they're men who designed, they didn't sing, but they designed, they lit, and they directed. And they were Italians, which is a different aesthetic, perhaps, from what you were working in some cases.
Well, I mean, Pierluigi was also an architect of education, I think. And the first time we worked together was at the Paris Opera. We did Alceste together. I did Hercules. And it was
typecasting.
So, well, not if you saw me in the costume that he put me in. I had a beard at the time and quite long curly hair, and he put glitter in my beard and diamonds in my hair, and I had a big silver cuirass, you know. But to sort of add scorn to difficulty, he put me on 40 centimeter stilts, you know, and at a certain point during the performance, I had to go down a very narrow staircase. Oh, by the way, I had also a very, very large aluminum club in my hand that was very heavy, despite the material, and also 7 meters of silk train behind me. And you
had to sing. Let's not forget that. You had to sing.
Yeah, that's a byproduct there. And I had to go down the pit to get Alceste out of Hades with these things. And I was terrified that I would, you know, fall on the soprano and crush half of the string section and so on and so forth. So any time I had free, I put on these enormous things that weighed a ton if they were made out of wood. And I was walking the corridors of the Paris Opera and scaring the hell out of the small ballet, the ballet children, the rats de ballet, and they called me Frankenstein. Frankenstein is coming. I was chasing them around. It was absolutely wonderful, but I never fell in them, so that was good.
But talk about Pizzi, because I worked a lot with Zeffirelli, and I've covered him in other programs, so we can talk about him. But Pizzi is less known, and I think he deserves more recognition than he's had.
Pizzi was a very big sucker for beauty, if I may put it like this. Everything was, what shall I say? It was stylized in a way where the beauty of all the shapes and the surfaces were always, polished black floors and stuff like that. It was lethal to walk on, but it was very, very handsome if it worked. And he was more a metteur en place than a metteur en scène, I would say. He would do the, tableaus more than going in to do the concept of it. So I think very often he would have good actors, singers do their parts. So that part was taken care of for him. But I liked working with him. He was very thorough and very particular about everything. And but he had this stylized way of doing it, which is very un-Italian, actually, because they're very hearty always,
Well, I would I agree with you 98%, would disagree 2%. I see him as being incredibly Italian, but of a different style. Mm-hmm. When I was originally saying that you're Danish and Zeffirelli and Pizzi are Italians, what I meant was, in my view, the Italians focus on il bello, as beauty, as you spoke about it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the visual tableau, the beauty, can get in the way of what we call naturalism.
Franco so had that, at least.
Definitely. And I think that the naturalism that we associate with certain Italian operas, Traviata would be one, and a lot of the Verismo works, disappears. The Barber of Seville, as you were talking about the production you were in by De Simone, was very stylized.
Yeah.
And stylized can be a positive thing or a negative thing, and I'm not judging here at all. But I find that a large part of the Italian stage aesthetic for opera is about il bello. I was a student of Giorgio Strehler, so he was about naturalism, and it was a different approach.
Yeah.
With sort of elegant minimalism, not spare, but minimalism. Whereas Pizzi and Zeffirelli were about incredibly gorgeous design, and as you properly said, mise en place, putting them in the place so that the performer fits into the larger visual picture. Yeah. He worked a lot, and he's with us, thank goodness, but he's not working that much at the moment. He worked a lot in Venice. Mm-hmm. And had a very particular relationship with the Teatro La Fenice. And the Venetian aesthetic of il bello, the beauty, fit perfectly with his approach. But his mm-hmm. stage pictures had to be smaller because the theater is not all that big. Before the fire in the late 90s, but even after, they've mm-hmm. kept it of its same size, but just with better equipment.
Yeah.
I know you've spent a fair amount of time in Italy, though I've never been there with you. I'm there all the time, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. But how has Italian aesthetics informed you? And I say aesthetics, not food and not singing, but I mean aesthetics.
Well, I am Italophile, if you get that. I love everything Italian. I love the fact that about 70% of the art treasures of the world are inside their borders. And you feel that. maybe the ordinary Italian does not really realize where he has the love for this and that from, but I assure you, there is a battery underneath them all 68 million of them, that will carry them through I don't know what not. And the beauty and I mean, if you have an open vision and the possibility to suck it in, as it were, I cannot think of a better place to do it than in Italy. So yes, it has absolutely played an enormous part in my life and the way that I see also painting. I mean, I've studied the Italian painters a lot, and the old ways of doing stuff in Cortona, where I spent 50% of my life nowadays. We have the son of the city is Signorelli, which of course is one of the real big Baroque painters, and the way that he can paint with colors is something that is unknown to us in the Nordic countries. We simply do not have this.
So do you mean Luca Signorelli?
Yes.
So I have a theory about him that no one's ever asked me, but since you bring him up, I'm going to bring it up.
Yeah.
He painted a lot of the very famous frescoes in the Church of Orvieto.
Yeah.
And I am a Michelangelo specialist, if I can be so modest, and have studied the life and travels of Michelangelo and said everything about him. I know that Michelangelo went to Orvieto. Mm-hmm. And I have a theory that his Michelangelo's fresco painting, especially of the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, not the ceiling, but the wall.
Oh, the end wall, yeah.
The end wall was influenced very much by the Luca Signorelli frescoes in Orvieto. What do you think?
I tend to agree on that. But there were this group of Florentine and also from Arezzo. I mean, Vasari lived in Arezzo, and I think they were quite close. Vasari was also the one that did the famous biography of, actually also of
the lives of the artists. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I think they not stole, but they were inspired by one another. I'm quite sure of that.
What I mean is not even the painterly style, but the drama.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think that the drama of the Last Judgment in Rome, in the Vatican, there are only two places I've seen it elsewhere, and I know that Michelangelo was in both of those places. One of them was the cathedral in Orvieto, and the other is, we know that when Michelangelo was 19, 20, 21, that he traveled to Venice and stopped in Padova and saw the Scrovegni Chapel with the frescoes by Giotto, which were, and I mean this in the best sense, didactic, that they were meant for teaching biblical stories and morals. But that's the earliest example I can think of early Renaissance art in which there's drama, there's painterly drama in the expressions of Mary's reaction to the death of her son and so forth, that Michelangelo picked up on. Yeah. Often when I teach stage direction and production, I make people look at art, especially Italian art, but also Goya, some of the Nordic painters, to understand not the tableau as Pizzi would do, but the emotion. Yeah. If I'm actually teaching stage direction rather than production design. Mm-hmm. And it's all there because those great artists captured human emotion unbridled by and uninfluenced by being a stylist, if you know what I mean. Yeah. They just showed emotion.
Something that also happened very much in that period was that they actually, I don't know if you read the book of David Hockney about the evolution of the technique of drawing. At a certain point, within very, very short time, all of a sudden they went from stick people, not that bad, but I mean, just to make a point of it, into something which was completely realistic, that you can see with Luca Signorelli, Vasari, and especially Michelangelo. And that's very funny, because it was as if they all of a sudden they had an epiphany and they could actually do it. And the thesis of Hockney was that they all of a sudden found out about some help methods, some technical helps, the concave mirror, or the camera lucida, camera oscura, and all of these things, which is quite very, very interesting, I think, to see, because it was within 15 years, all of a sudden they could do it.
So I was going to get to painting later, but I'm going to go there now, and then we'll come back to music, Michael. Is that
all
okay?
Right.
What I'm about to talk about is actually a sculptor, not a painter. On one of my first visits to Copenhagen, because I'm sort of a completist, in addition to going to the Glyptotek, the National Museums, and the Louisiana Museum, which is more modern, I heard about the Torvaldsson Museum, and everyone said, "Oh, you'll love it. It's very good." I didn't know what it was at all. I just went there because it was near the opera house where I was working, and I went for what I thought would be an hour, and it became 5. Bertil Torvaldson was a Danish sculptor who spent a great deal of his time in Italy, especially Rome.
Yeah.
And in a way, I knew Canova, I knew Rodin, of course, but I had not known anything about Torvaldsson, who really is up there with those guys as a 19th century sculptor.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to ask you to talk about him, but also physically, it's one of the most beautiful museums in the world. And did he paint the interiors, or did someone else paint the interior? Talk about that museum. Talk about Torvaldsson, and I guess you were exposed to his work early, and then talk about that museum.
Bertil Torvaldson had a rather interesting, childhood, because his father was a woodcarver, but a very poor one. He did, the figures in the front of the boats, but not the good ones, the one for the fishermen, and stuff like this. And he was a drunkard, and they were very poor, and it was very strange. And at a very, very early age, Bertil Torvaldson helped the father when he could see that he had too much schnapps inside him to finish this thing, and he would actually start carving. And he would have a God-given gift of making something plastic out of this thing. And it was noticed, he all of a sudden there were some people that said, we have to invest in this person. So he was very, very early. He was put in the art academy, and some of the high teachers in the top of the art academy said, well, I mean, if you really want to amount to something, you have to go to Rome. And we are talking about the mid-1800s. Everybody who wanted to be anything within the arts had to go to Rome for some years. So he went down there, and very quickly, actually, he started to get a name for himself. And it took a little time for him to evolve from clay and wood into the marble thing. But as soon as he had the possibility of doing a marble statue, one of his first works was Jason with the Golden Fleece, which is actually now in front of the Modern Art Museum in Rome. It's down there, and the square is called Piazza Torvaldsson. Mm-hmm. And that was a complete sensation, because people had never seen anything like that. Bertil Torvaldson wanted always to work in very pristine sugar marble. Mm-hmm. It was white. There were no veins in that, and he would create this very, very smooth surface that Michelangelo never had. I never worked at either. You would always see the chisel of Michelangelo and all of the others. But Bertil kept on doing it until you could actually, one of his very famous sculptures, you can see the dent of the fingers of the sculpture into the arm or the leg or whatever it is. he would keep on doing it until perfection. And he became enormously famous, and was a very, very wealthy man. And people thought that he was never going to go back to Denmark. But in old age, when he sort of became poorly and so on, he was actually persuaded to come back home for a big exhibition. And they moved all these enormous sculptures by boat, which is actually the frieze around the Torvalds Museum, to have this. And he never left again. He became a very, very loved professor at the Royal Academy in Denmark. And he died, funny enough, in his seat in the Royal Opera during a performance.
Of what?
I can't remember. I think it was a ballet, actually.
We wanted to be Benvenuto Cellini, but
maybe.
The museum itself it reminds me a bit of ancient Roman rooms, not ruins, but rooms, or Pompeian rooms.
Pompeian rooms, and Egypt as well.
Perspective. Would you describe it? You're the artist. Describe what it looks like. It's just an amazing museum.
Well, it's built around a courtyard in which he is actually buried. He's in there. He lies there. And it's a series of rooms with each their color. And it has a lot of, as you say, Pompeian decoration, beautiful vaulted ceilings. And usually there is only one statue in every small room, which makes a perfect background for these white, pristine marble statues, because there's a lot of color in the museum.
Yeah,
and they're prime colors. They're punchy, and it's really beautiful. And the light is wonderful. They've done some fantastic work. So these very, very soft marble have very, very soft and caressing light on them. I can only say to anybody who comes to Denmark, they should go for a walk in the Torvalds Museum, because it's something very special.
If we use the trendy word installation, I think it's one of the greatest installations I've ever seen anywhere.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
I hold it up sort of as the gold standard of how, if I were an artist, I want my art displayed.
Yeah.
I'm not an artist, but I love visual arts, obviously. And so therefore that museum just changed my life in a lot of ways. Now, let's put it this way. When people talk about me, they say there's the opera Fred Plotkin and there's the food Fred Plotkin. And they don't know that that's the same person. I've had editors of important magazines call me up and ask the music Fred Plotkin, do I happen to know the food Fred Plotkin? And I put them in touch. This happened on a very famous American magazine. The editor said, well, Fred, we like your work and music and so on, but you couldn't know what he knows about food. Can you connect us? And I said, well, I can do that. I'll have him call you. And I had a different phone number to call from. And I called up and I pitched my voice very low. And I used a slightly different accent. And she didn't know that it was the same person. And what it resulted was she sent me to Venice to do an article about Venice in winter and the food scene in Venice in winter. And my contract, after no one looked at my social security number, it was the same one as the music Fred Plotkin. And she then called me up and she said, it's you, isn't it? And I said, well, it actually is possible. And she said, well, we love your food article, but how did you learn anything about music? I say this not to talk about me, but to give that as an example, is that Jesse Norman famously said, pigeonholes are for pigeons. And when you pigeonhole someone, confining him to one definition, we miss multitudes. And you, my friend, are an example of multitudes in that you don't dabble, you're not a dilettante, but you go deep, deep, deep into the creative things that you do really well. And I knew you first as a singer and enjoyed your performances. We will talk about music again. And then I enjoyed your productions. Often I saw them when you were not there, because our lives have been parallel, but not the tracks didn't join very often.
Yeah.
And but I've come to know about you that you are a world-class painter and a portrait artist. And you're not the first in the Melbye line. And that's what I want to start talking about, that when Torvaldson went to Rome in the 19th century, there were three Melbye brothers, all of whom were painters. And there was, I wrote this down, you remember them, of course, Fritz, Anton, and Wilhelm.
Yeah.
And today is Wilhelm's birthday. He would have been 197 years old.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So happy birthday, Wilhelm.
Yeah.
And when I started looking at their art online, of course, because I can't go anywhere right now, and I discovered that Fritz had a more French influence. He traveled everywhere, actually.
Yeah.
He died at the age of 43 in China. He was a friend of Camille Pissarro.
And also his teacher, his mentor.
Was Pissarro?
No, Melbye was.
Okay, so let's start talking about Fritz Melbye first.
Well, I mean, they all started out as either landscapes or maritime painters, and then evolved to something else. They all did different things. Anton Melbye is probably the most famous of the three brothers. He was also, I believe, the oldest of them.
And a photographer as well.
Yeah.
He early in photography before.
Very early, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. They were famous in their time, which is what we call the golden age of Danish art, which also Bertil Torvaldson took part in. I mean, they were all in this, goulash together. And they're very sort of, they're a little bit different. I mean, Anton was very sort of worked through and sort of very accurate with most of what he did. Fritz was more, you could see that he would be a mentor for Pissarro, who was actually the father of Impressionism. So if I may, I can say, well, I have two genes maybe that go into the Impressionists. He was more also because he was very, very often in the Middle Americas, and he was, all over the place. So he had a lot of impressions. Wilhelm was definitely the little brother who was sort of trying to follow up on the two others. I have a few pieces of his as well. And they're okay, but they're not big art, I must say. Anton is where things happen. I can tell you a funny story about him. I was born in center of Copenhagen, and I have been most of my life there. And we have the Hirschbaum Collection, which is one of the really wonderful collections, a private gentleman who earned an enormous amount of money on doing cigars. And they're still being produced. And he donated his huge collection to the city of Copenhagen, providing that they would build a museum for it. So it's there, and it has a beautiful collection of Golden Age paintings, but also later the Danish Impressionists like Krøyer and these people. And there are some very nice portraits. And there was one special portrait that I would always, when I had gone through the whole thing, I would always go and say hello to this person. The thing about this museum is that it's not written on a little cardboard thing underneath who is this or who is it done by. But I just had to say hello to this person. I don't know why. And then all of a sudden, I said to myself, I need to know who this is and who painted it. I still can't remember who painted it, but the painting was a portrait of Anton Melbye. Ah. And every time I came, sometimes he would say, so what are you doing now? Are you studying well in school? And sometimes he was happy, it was very, very good portrait, reflecting the humor that I was carrying to the portrait. So that was very strange that I finally found out who that was.
Well, next time you're in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I'm going to take you to a painting that I've visited since I'm a small boy. And every time I go to the Met Museum, no matter what I'm seeing there, I stop to see him and say hello to this figure in this painting. I know exactly what you're talking about. And I wonder if listeners have a comparable painting that they have at their local museums that they inevitably connect to in a particular way.
Hmm.
So in school, and I don't necessarily mean art school, but I mean general school when you were a boy, when they taught the golden age of Danish painting, or at least mentioned that Denmark during its imperial time had this wonderful school of painters in addition to the ballet school and opera, yes, but really ballet. And you heard the surnames of Melbye. Did you wonder, am I connected to them, or were you told at home that you were connected?
There was this myth that he was my two-time, oh God, what do you call that?
Great.
Yeah, he was my great grandfather, but that's not the case. He was my great cousin.
Anton was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's there. My grandfather always said, we have three mainstreams in our family: painters, priests, and highway robbers. So you have to choose which of them you choose. So I chose the highway robbers, which is the theater people,
And then the painters for good measure, but
yeah,
I don't think priestly activities were part of your.
well, there were a lot of priests in our family, I can tell you. So.
Really, but not you. You didn't go in
Not
that
me,
direction.
no.
Yeah.
I sang in churches for a lot of years. Yeah.
Definitely. So when did you discover your painting talent? Did you feel it, or did you go to study it? How did that awaken?
My mother was a painter. My biological mother was a painter, and by the time of 3 years old, I was given a brush in my hand. So she was the first teacher I had. She was a photorealist in watercolor, very good at it. So that was the foundation of it. When I was 14, I visited one of my schoolmates, and the parents of this schoolmate had rented out a garden house to a very famous Danish painter, Kai Christensen. And he was an old bloke who would sit down in the garden doing these wonderful poetic paintings. And I was completely fascinated about him. So I went down and sat very quietly behind him to see what he was doing. To this point, the same thing that happened to me in the theater, he turned around and said, "Don't you think you have to do something yourself instead of gloating at me?" And I said, "Well, I've never done oil painting, but he says, come here, and, here's some brushes, oil paints, now we're painting this tree," and so on and so forth. And I painted with him for 6 years. And so he was really my first real teacher. About 3 months after I met him, we had a concert, a Christmas concert in my school, and I was in the school chorus. And it was Charpentier's Christmas Mass, which is not very often performed.
Nope.
And we had the general rehearsal at the same day as the concert was, just before. And during the rehearsal, the bass lost his voice completely. And since it's not very often performed, you couldn't just call up the next bass and say, "Come and sing it for you." And panic broke out because they didn't want to cancel the concert. And I said, "I know the part." I was 14 years old. And they looked at me, and they didn't have a choice. It was either cancellation or maybe potential disaster with this young bloke. And
may I ask, at 14, had your voice transitioned toward?
It never broke. My voice, okay. I had a very, very deep voice.
Okay.
So I had the full voice back then. And it went fine. And there was a German conductor present. Funny enough, you know, the finger of God. And he came up and said to me, you know, you should do something with this. You have something special there. And I said, no, I'm going to be an architect or a painter or something like that. That's what I want to do. And but luckily he was stubborn. So he called my parents. He found out who my parents was, and he said, look, you have a son with some quite extraordinary talent here. I think he should actually, you know, somebody should hear this. And so my parents reluctantly said, okay, I mean, yeah, sure, go ahead, take him. They didn't believe that it would amount to anything whatsoever. And he called one of the rather famous Danish sopranos at the time and said, look, I found this boy, and I think you should listen to him. And she said, oh, well, all right, I'll listen to him. 14 years, what the hell can he do, you know? So I went out. I was terrified, completely terrified, because she was very famous, and I had heard her.
Do you want to name her?
What?
Would you like to say her name? Or
yeah, it's Kirsten Hermansen.
Oh, sure, okay.
Yeah, Kirsten Hermansen, wonderful coloratura soprano.
Yeah.
And she said, so what are you going to sing? Well, I said, well, I was taught Heidenröslein. I said, all right, it's fine. And I said to her, the first big mistake was, do you want to play it through, you know, so you know what to play? And he said, that's certainly not, that's not necessary. I was like, I could have done my job. So she started, and I started singing. And I could see that her back straightened slightly. And she turned to me and said, young man, this was the end of your architectural line of business. And she took care of me until I entered the conservatory. And she was also my professor at the conservatory. So it was all parallel. And I never stopped painting. I love.
Well, I know that you painted your walls in Hamburg. That's how I mentioned that. But you are, portraiture is a big part of your painting work.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always wanted to ask you, and this is personal, it's not intimate, but it's personal in the sense that you have created characters as a singer. You have had to understand motivation, intention as a director and as a singer. You bring a lot of all of that you could bring, I mean, to your painting in terms of your human insight, because your portraits they're people. And I think you know what I mean. They're not just plastic, they are people. There's ideas in the eyes and the way the mouth might be positioned, all of that. I'm not an expert on painting, but does your background and your experience and your sensibility, and that's why I was talking before about the aesthetics of Italy, your sensibility as a musician inform your sensibility as a painter?
They're very much interlinked, the two of them, I think. I mean, there's musicality in painting as well. I mean, there are rhythms in paintings, but when you're talking about studying of character and stuff like this, I mean, I was doing Stillleben, still lifes at the start, until my mentor and very good friend, famous Danish baritone Ib Hansen, was going in pension. And as in many opera houses, there is a tradition at the Royal Opera here that the icons would get their painting or their bust made or something like that. And I am quiet a little bit because nobody talked about making a portrait of this person. And I thought, that's extraordinary. I mean, he carried their repertoire for 40 years. And I don't know why, but it sort of had fallen out. And I decided that I wanted to try my hand at a portrait. I'd never done a portrait before. So I went to the photographer that did all the photography for the Danish opera and said, do you have an unpublished photograph of Ib Hansen, you know, in his signature role, which was in Masquerade, the old man.
By Carl Nielsen, about who we're going to talk later.
Yeah. And he said, yeah, you can just go. The box is over there. You just, you know, figure one out. And I took one out and I explained to her what I was going to do and said to her, you keep your mouth shut about this because I don't know if I can do it. I just want to do it. And if it's all right, I'm going to give it to the Royal Opera. So at the end, when I had been working on this for months and months, it's a big painting. I called the general director of the Danish Opera and said, I have something that I would like to offer the Opera House, and I would like you to come out and have a look at it. And I want you to be absolutely, you know, raw and honest. If you don't think that it's worth it, we'll forget about it and I'll throw it in the channel and that's it. But if not, I would like to give it as a gift. And he looked at it for 2 seconds and said, oh yeah, we would like that very much. Now, the rule when you are getting painted for the Royal Opera is that you cannot go into the public area until you are dead. So, and he was very much alive, Ib Hansen, at the time. And so they put it on the big wall in one of the lobbies backstage. And that was fine. But the general director thought there was a pity that the public did not know that Ib Hansen had been painted as an homage to him. So he exhibited the portrait in the big foyer for 2 months. And an avalanche of commissions came my way.
May I just ask, old opera house, new opera house?
Old.
Okay.
This is before the new house was even talked about.
Okay.
And so, you know, I was like, oh, well, maybe this is what I have to do when the voice is not good anymore, or I don't want to have the trouble with the theater and everything, you know. And slowly I sort of became more and more the portrait painter and less the singer and director. So it was a very, very smooth transcendent to this. And 7 years ago, with my goodbye performance in Dallas, Die Todesstadt, I decided that's it. 43 years in theater is fine, and now I want to do my painting, you know. So that was how
But no production direction as well. I can see stopping singing, because especially if you have to wear 40-centimeter boots. But
no, I mean, I stopped singing in 2001. That was my 25th anniversary as a singer. Okay. And I've always been taught also by Kirsten Hermansen, you should leave the audience hungry for more. So don't wait until you have a wobble of 2.5 meters, you know. Yeah. Stop while you can still do it. And they will ask themselves, why did he stop? Why isn't, instead of saying, well, thank God we're rid of him, you know. Yeah. So, and it was wonderful because I started directing and designing at the same time as I started doing my portraiture. And it sort of evolved, and I met Richard Schmid, the American painter who had just died, actually, only 3 weeks ago. Very funnily, because I did, as you know, a lot of seasons at the Santa Fe Opera in New Mexico. And that, of course, is a big art enclave, and I became member of several groups of painters that went into the desert and paint and so on and so forth. And one of these painters said, you know, you paint like Richard Schmid. Don't you want to come? He has a lecture at the Metropolitan Museum in New York when you're done for the season here. And I didn't have anything to do right after the season. So I said, oh yeah, let's do that. And it wasn't everybody who could come. You had to submit something that he could look, because he didn't want anybody there. So we took pictures of what I had done in the desert of Santa Fe and submitted them, and we both got admitted, actually. And we came, and I thought, well, I'm going to be together with 32 blue-haired old women wanting to see this presentation. No, we were 450 people, artists from all over the world. And one of the curators came in and said, well, we're like 60 countries, here in the room. So I'm going to name the different countries. So please stand up when your country comes up. And when Denmark came up, there was one standing up. And I said, I'm here. And Richard Smith stood up on stage and said, Michael, we're going to have lunch afterwards. And I was like, and 400 people turned around and said, who the hell is that idiot? And that was the beginning of a wonderful, wonderful and long friendship. And he was my mentor, and he taught me everything I know about this thing.
I recently sat for a portrait during the pandemic. And the artist, you may know him. I'll introduce you if you don't. His name is Harry Hancock, and he's British, but he lives in Spain. And his partner does makeup for the opera in Barcelona.
Oh.
And previously at the Met, and that's where I met Harry. Like you, I've seen Harry maybe twice, 3 times in my life, but we were always in touch. And Harry, like you, had a deep immersion in Tuscan art and portraiture and so on. And he decided during the pandemic, which is still present as far as I'm concerned, it's not in the past, even though America is having an upturn, but we're still living the pandemic as a horror for the world. He focused on the word quarantena, which means quarantine in Venetian, because when the Venetians would suspect the problem, it would be 40 days. So he wanted to do 40 portraits of people in quarantine. And what he did was he used our screens, our Zoom or whatever, and we sat for our portraits. And he wrote to me the other day that mine is practically done and dry and so forth. I'll see it soon. But I've sat for other photographers, and once before for a painting for quite a long time because the artist was doing backdrops and so on. But this was so particular because I was not in Harry's presence, technically. I was seated exactly where I'm seated now, except that I requested of him that we do it at night, because it's night for me and morning in Spain, because I'm a night owl. And in the pandemic, when we were isolated in a lot of ways, the only place where I was not in a mask and gloves and such was in this room and in my apartment. But I tended at night not to really put lights on. And so he had the particular challenge opportunity of painting someone in the dark whose reflection was off the screen. And all the other people he painted were in their gardens or in their kitchens in daylight. And it was a fascinating experience. And I look forward to seeing the painting, but it raised many questions for me as a sitter that I didn't want to ask Harry while he was doing the painting. I'll ask him one day, but I want to ask you, to what degree does the sitter have a role, a contribution, a responsibility, or maybe should just shut up and be quiet? How do you guide and train the sitters, and what do you expect from the sitter?
Well, I mean, it's very much a collaboration. The way I start a portrait is also always, I have some interview days. I live with them. I go with them to work. I ask them, we cook together, we eat together. I want to get under their skin. All along, I have my video camera going, recording all kinds of small tics and so on and so forth.
Your mental video camera. Your
Yes.
mental, yeah.
Yeah, my mental video camera.
Your eyes and brain, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then I pose certain questions to them, which will eventually give me an idea who is this person. And then I invite them to my studio usually, and I take an enormous amount of pictures and also sometimes videos of them, because many of the people that I paint, royalty, members of parliament and so on, they cannot sit for 250 hours. You know, it's very seldom that these CEOs, the guys with the, you know, they can't sit for so long. So I have had to teach myself also to work from a screen, funny enough. And then I will detract a nose, an eye, you know, a corner of a mouth, a gesture with a hand, a shoulder movement, or whatever it is. And I will take that from different photos and I will do a sort of very rough sketch. We have, of course, by then talked about what is the portrait going to be used for? Is it a corporate portrait? Is it going to be hung in Parliament? Is it in a castle? Is it over your own fireplace? Or is it for your mother or whatever? You know, there are certain things that will direct you to what kind of style you want to do it in. And we've discussed what they're going to wear and what their expectations of a portrait of them will be. And then I call them in and they see this very rough sketch. And some like them, some say, well, I would like to be standing, or can't you do something with my belly or my double chin or whatever, you know, and I said, well, maybe we could just alter the lighting, you know, and then I draw them finished while they're there. So I'm sure that everything is where it's supposed to be and they're happy with the drawing. Then they're sent home and I will paint as far as I can get from my memory and from some of the paintings, the photographs, and that sketch. I do the sketch on the canvas itself. And when I feel that I can't get further, I invite them again, and then we have the final sittings, which can be anywhere from 1 to 10, depending on if I got them, you know, if I saw them correctly.
Now, what happens when the subject is very happy with the result, but the artist thinks, no, it's not quite right, and I should, quote, fix it? I once saw that happen, and it was very frustrating to the person who was depicted because the painting was terrific, and then it was kind of marred because the artist had a second opinion, even though the subject had been very pleased with what was there.
You should always try not to fix it because it will never be fixed.
Yeah.
I think in order to get a portrait to be very alive and sort of have also a certain amount of abstraction in it, you have to be very fresh. I paint alla prima, which means that I shovel on the paint, you know, in one big gulp, and it's wet, and I work around with it, and I move things around and sort of that. But if you start to do ni things on them, which I call, that's all my pupils know about the ni, what that is. That's when they go like this, you know, and it's always wrong. And you might ask, when do you know when it's finished? Well, Richard Schmidt always said, because it's a very, very often asked question, you have to ask yourself, because you arrive at a certain point where you say, should I not? Should I not? Will the next stroke add or detract from the painting? And that's when you're finished. When you can't answer this question, then you should just stop it right there.
So I just sort of something I've never asked an artist before. How long does it take for paint to dry?
Oh, that depends very much how thickly you paint and how much oil you put into it. I usually work pretty much out of the tube. You know, I don't add things to it. I like the consistency of the gambling colors that I work with. They're nice and buttery, and I can do whatever I want. And some of them are different than, you know, all the earth colors have a certain consistency. All the chemical ones, all the cadmium ones have a certain, you know, way of them. But I like the play of these things, so I don't put things into it. But superficially, if you do not put, like, I don't know who to compare with. If you don't put a lot of paint on, it will be superficially dry within a week, 10 days.
Okay. Does the painting then have to be treated or finished or something else done to it before it's deliverable?
Yeah. I mean, I always say to my pupils that they should varnish it.
Okay.
Not so much to give a glow to it. You can also have matte varnish, but it does protect the painting from, you know, soot or oils and you know, emissions from cars and stuff like that. It's much easier nowadays to remove the varnish and put a new fresh one on.
Do you think that a painter should have a say, a role in the choosing of the frame and the matting and how the painting, because I think I've seen beautiful paintings ruined by awful frame and matting.
Absolutely. Yeah. I usually design the frames for whatever paintings I do. And of course, if the economy is not there, you can say, well, I think you should do this and that. It could be this kind of frame, but keep it simple. You know, black frames usually means that the person in the picture is dead, and things like that. You know, I mean, there are certain.
I didn't know that.
But I always say to them, you know, I think it's a pity that you have bought a Porsche and now you want to put wheels of a bicycle on it. That's not a good combination, you know. So a good frame is a way into the painting. It shouldn't overpower it, but it shouldn't be puny either. It's a hole in the wall to lead you into the painting.
So you just reminded me of something from many years ago. When I lived in Italy and was a student, I too had mentors, and one of them was an Italian. She was nobility, but she didn't behave that way. She was a very nice, down-to-earth woman who happened to be nobility. And I was in Milan and she was in Rome. And she said, I don't ask anything of you except that, because it was not easy to make a phone call at that time, that you write me a letter every so often and tell me what's going on. And I bought very beautiful stationery at a stationery shop in Milan. And I remember that when I bought stacks of it, the person was selling me the stationery said, "Mi dispiace, I'm sorry." And I said, "Why?" She, "Ma vede, see, you see." And I didn't say, I don't know what she was talking about. And it turns out that in Italy, maybe still now, but back then, when someone died, you would choose a black bordered stationery with a gray paper. It was very beautiful.
Yeah.
And inside the envelope was all black. And I wrote to Cipriano, was her name, you know, Cara Cipriano, and I'd write the letter and take great care in my Italian. And she wrote back and she said, you know, I love your letters, but has someone died? I said, no, why? We only use this when people die.
True.
But did you mean that a painting with a black frame means they're dead?
Usually. That's a very, I mean, it's from the 19th century, but that was usually what you put around to commemorate the person.
I didn't know that. So now we are going to, so listeners, I mean this, I've seen Michael's portraits. If you want your portrait done, he's an outstanding portrait artist. And this brings me back to music. I had an image while you were talking about how you paint that one of your most famous roles is Papageno.
Yeah.
And Tamino, who is the tenor and a little more noble and not so loosey-goosey like Papageno, sings an aria at the beginning, "This Bildnis ist bezaubernd schön." This portrait is so beautiful, it's Pamina. And I can just picture you going, not so beautiful. Because Papageno can do practically anything in the opera, and kind of like Cherubino in Le Nozze di Figaro, Papageno can steal the opera from everyone else.
Yeah, he can get away with it.
With just about everything. Did you build, Hugh, because in Hamburg, you improved and perfected your German, did you build spontaneity, ad-libbing, anything into your characterization? I saw you do it in New York in 2 separate seasons in 91 and 95 and loved it. And that's when actually we were together last. And I can't believe it's been 26 years since you and I have been in the same room, but
crazy.
But how did your Papageno grow or change with different productions and as you changed as a man?
Well, I think when you're acting against somebody, you always have to modify your expression. I mean, it's like a ping pong play, really, and some people cannot give you the same kind of ping pong as others can. And, the one where you start ad-libbing and make fun of whatever. I remember one evening we had a Swiss first priest who was a tenor, and his dialogue, he spoke in Schweizerdeutsch,
German.
yeah, which is about the ugliest language on the planet. And at a certain point, when Papageno gets into a word fight with him, I started mimicking him. And that was in Hamburg, and the public just went wild. They thought it was so funny. Christoph von Dochner, he was leaning over he couldn't watch it anymore. But I'm not quite sure that the singer thought it was very funny, actually.
Did he understand?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, he had enough humor to know that.
No, he survived it. But I think it depends very much on the role, obviously. The Barber of Seville, you can ad lib.
Sure.
To Kingdom Come, and Papageno is also one of those ones where you can. There are certain modern operas where you can be more an actor than a singer. One must not forget, obviously, that Papageno was actually written for an actor.
Yeah,
it wasn't.
The man who wrote it is the man who played Emanuel Schikaneder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that he has been ad-libbing, a lot during those performances in the Volksoper back in the day. Mm-hmm. So I think that you should feel, if it's not natural for the part, you should be very you should stick to the paper. There was one line at the Met where, and I have no idea where that came from. There's a big monologue in the middle where they're stuck and they're not supposed to speak, the two of them. And I picked up a cranium and I said, "Oy vey." And the public went wild. And I was called to Joey Volpe's office and told not to say that. I was not supposed to make fun of the Jews. And I was like, I'm terribly sorry. I don't know where it comes from. It was nothing that I thought.
I don't think the Jews minded.
No, I don't think so either.
But there you are, a Dane picking up a skull, a cranium, a skull. Did you for a moment think of Hamlet?
Oh, yeah, I did. In Covent Garden, I said, "Ach, armer Yorick." They like that.
Have you ever played the operatic Hamlet? He's a baritone by Ambroise Thomas.
No, I've sung him in concert, but I've never played him on stage. Unfortunately, it was written for me. I mean, it was so well for the voice. But
in your voice, and you're Danish. How many Danish operatic Hamlets are there? So I guess there's so many people I could ask you about, but I mentioned earlier that we're going to talk about Robert Gamble, who's been a friend and colleague and collaborator of yours as a singer, and then you directed him. Exactly. And for people who don't know him, he's an American tenor from Indiana who largely has done his career in Europe. We're all contemporaries. And he's one of those tenors, like Gregory Kundi is another one, whose voice began in bel canto and then expanded to dramatic, and Gregory more in the Italian and Robert more in the German.
Yeah.
Talk about him, and maybe one day I'll have him join me for a conversation like this.
Yeah, you should. He and I are exactly the same age. I think he's 3 weeks younger than I am. And the first time we met was doing Les Troyens by Berlioz in Hamburg. And he did, and the name of his role actually escapes me, but he did
Yopa,
yeah, something like that.
EAS, yeah.
And he has one aria which is absolutely wonderful, and he sang the hell out of this part, and it was wonderful. He had the biggest applause of the whole evening. It was wonderful, and we had a ball. We shared our dressing room, and we just went on the town together and everything, and became very good friends. And we then, went on to do numerous Barber of Sevilles and Pasquales together, and so on and so forth. He was, as you said, in Aix-en-Provence as well. And we were suffering together because the Aix-en-Provence had a heat wave when we were doing it. It was so warm. And I actually had rented a house with a swimming pool. He moved in. He wanted a swimming pool, so that was fine. And then we didn't see each other. I stopped singing and I went back to Denmark. I sort of stopped the international career because I felt lonely, and I wanted to see my family and my friends and maybe have a family of my own, and so on and so forth. So I went back and we sort of lost contact. And then I started directing, and I was invited to do my first Tristan as a director and designer at the National Danish Opera, the one in Aarhus. And we were discussing who to pick for Tristan. And I had actually just seen a bit on the internet of him singing. And I said, why don't we take Robert Gamble? And he said, oh, I thought he was a lyric tenor. I said, not anymore. He has this huge voice. Mm-hmm. And he went up, and we, it was just like putting the pickup back on the record. We went off again, and he did a wonderful Tristan, absolutely wonderful, very sort of deep, very well played, wonderfully sung. And we had Anne Petersen, a Danish soprano who had her debut in the Isolde part, just killed the part. I mean, the two of them together were fabulous. It was absolutely wonderful. So,
and I know, because we've discussed this in the past, that Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau threaded through both of our lives. Talk about how you got to know Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. I met him when I was same time as Axel Schutz. He was also a family guest here in New York, and I then got to see him when I was an adult. But it's not about me today, it's about you.
Well, I had a schoolmate who was not only very good at tennis, so he always beat me, and he was also an excellent pianist back then. And we're talking about 13, 14 years old. And we would also, after having decimated me on the tennis field, we would go to his house, which was next to the club, and have tea. And he would always put on Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. He was an avid fan of him. And he would discuss how brilliant it was, and the interpretation and the length of the voice and blah, 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 until I was up to here with Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. And I said to him, look, it cannot possibly be that difficult to sing like this. And he almost became, violent with me. And he said, well, look, this record, and he gave me a single record with 3 lieder on it, One was Der Leiermann. Now you try and sound like Fischer Dieskau, and I trained for months to try and make this sound, and it was horrible, and I couldn't. And it was one day, all of a sudden, on my bicycle on the way back from school, I found the hole to sing through, and I was like, "Oh my God!" And this huge thing came out, and I went and I could sing, and you know it was fine. And I went back to him and I said, "No, I can do it." He said, "Yeah, that's fine." And so we did Leiermann together, and he said, "My God, how the hell did you do that? How did you find this thing?" And I said, "I have no idea." And it was just very natural for me. You know, all the functions with the passaggio, everything was there. I had a natural deep voice that, you know, mounted in. It was almost a tenor voice at that time. I had high C's, you know, coming out of my sleeve, but I still had the deep notes as well. And that was, you know, just after that, the conductor heard me. And, you know, the rest is history, as they say.
Well, I mention this because it's interesting how things that we, from one day to the next, don't anticipate, step into your life and change your lives.
Yeah.
And I mention this because I know many people who have been despondent and have had a terrible year and a half now, or if you live in America with Donald Trump, a lot of years, where you really become despondent, and without hope and so on. And I, for one, find hope in music and in literature and being a great cook. Let's not pretend I'm a great cook. So every night there's good food here, not fancy food, but just very good food always that is pleasing. And people follow me on Facebook, expect to see what I cooked plus the recipe on how to cook it. But I always look for inspiration. And when I created the series for IDAGIO about Fred Plotkin on Fridays, it was really about inspiration at a time when people didn't have it. And you give the whole story of your life is an openness to the new and to discovering inspiration and waiting for it to happen by being patient and by working through things. And you had mentors apparently who recognize your talents. I want to, speaking of that kind of thing, tell us about Herbert Van Karien, because, you know, talk about the finger of God. That's a whole hand coming.
Well, Van Karien, the story was quite amusing, actually, because I had just had my first foreign production ever outside of Denmark, and it was the Spoleto Festival. I was actually supposed to have sung a very small part in a modern opera there, but they ran out of money. So they thought it was a pity for this young Danish singer not to have anything at all. So they called my agent and asked whether I had done Danilo in The Merry Widow. And my manager said, of course, he's sung it 1,000 times. I never even heard the thing at the time. And I said, well, isn't that a tenor part? You know, and I ran to the score store and flipped through and said, oh, I suppose I can do that. So I went down there, and long story short, it went very well. And I actually was awarded the Golden Pegasus Award for it, with very, very nice company, you know, like Bernstein and Rudolf Nureyev and so on and so forth. I mean, it was a big level, and I was completely unaware of this prize. And apparently, Van Karien heard about this. What had happened, though, was a group of us decided that after the rather lengthy festival, we wanted to go on holiday together. We became good friends, and so we went to Morocco. And, you know, we went to a wonderful hotel. And one of the days we came back from the beach, the guy on the desk said, I have a telephone message for you. I said, oh. And it was a certain Mr. Van Karien. And I was like, who of my friends are pulling my legs here? You know, what is this? But I could see that the number was not a Danish number. So I called the number, and it was Lore Salzburger Festspielhaus, his secretary. I said, yes, this is Mikael Melbye. Ah, yeah, the maestro would like to speak to you. And he came on the horn. And I was, you know, I was almost starting to do this. And he said, yeah, I heard about, he had a very strange growling voice.
Yes, he did, yeah.
I heard about that you had, and people think that I should hear you and so on and so on. So why don't you, you know, hop on the first airplane, and I want to hear some Don Giovanni. You know that, I'm sure. You know. And I was like, I had left all my, you know, formal clothes in Spoleto. I basically only had short pants and Hawaii shirts. And I said, well, maybe I can buy something in Salzburg. So I took the first plane out to Salzburg, learning Don Giovanni, the two arias, in the plane on the way up. At the plane, when I arrived, I was hijacked by the chauffeur of Karien, driven directly to Großes Festspielhaus, where there was a big concert in the honor of Herbert Van Karien, whose 50th birthday it was. I was sat next to her in Karien's box with my short pants and very blonde hair. And he played with the Vienna Philharmonic Pathétique Tchaikovsky, which brought me to tears instantly. I could not stop crying. It was so incredible. When it was all done, Herbert Van Karien took my shirt and said, "You're coming to the party." So she dragged me to Goldner Hirsch, which is the very nice hotel on the other side.
Beautiful hotel.
Absolutely. And sat me down next to her. In front of me was Herbert Van Karien, and to the next to him was Rainer Kapaiwanska. And there I was, 26 years old, with straw-colored hair, brown as a nut, in short pants and Hawaii shirt. And they were all formally dressed, obviously. And at a certain point, Karien asked his wife out to dance. And Rainer Kapaiwanska leaned over and said, "Are you sure you know what you're getting yourself into here?" I said, "No, I don't. I've been hijacked." "Do you have anywhere to stay?" I said, "No, I haven't." "Well, I have a suite in this hotel, and there's a guest room. You are having it. And this is the key. Go up now, because you're singing tomorrow. I know this. So go up and sleep." So the next morning, I came to the, and of course, I didn't have time or money to buy any formal clothes. So I was still in my short pants and my Hawaii shirt.
You couldn't even get lederhosen?
No, I don't think so. They are very expensive, actually.
The Austrians call it a Tracht, the sort of traditional.
Yeah, exactly. So they were in the rehearsal for the Falstaff, the wonderful Falstaff with Tadej, Kapaiwanska, Panerai. I mean, all of the stars were there, and I was completely in awe, sitting, you know, on the fourth row, looking at all this. And Karien was directing, and then all of a sudden he called out, "Melbye auf der Bühne, 10 Minuten Pause, alle anderen, out," you know. And I thought they were going to the canteen to have a coffee. No, they all went to the front row and sat, all of these huge stars, and I was like, "Oh God, please kill me with a stroke of lightning," something like this, you know. So luck wanted that the voice was okay, and I sang the two arias, and he said, "Melbye, my bureau," you know, up in my office. So I went up there, and he said, "You know, that's quite good. You have everything, even beautiful legs." And that was the start of a collaboration. We did some concerts together, and of course we did the wonderful Carmen recording with Jose Carreras and Agnes Balsa, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, he didn't live very long after that.
No, I know.
Oh, he was already an old.
I think he died in '89, if I remember.
Yeah. But what he gave me, and you can talk about inspiration there, he invited me to study the role of Don Giovanni with him.
Mm.
For 3 weeks, I was with him for 3 or 4 hours a day, just the two of us. And I mean, I will never, ever forget that in my entire life.
I'm not so much what did he teach you, but how did he teach you?
Very gently. The funny thing about Herbert Van Karien was that he was very different when the entourage was around him. He was a monster, you know, and very sort of authoritarian. But when you had him alone, he was just as jovial as you and me.
That's saying something.
Well, it is. But I mean, the amount of knowledge that he poured out of him in those 3 weeks was not to be bought for any sum of money.
Did he give you any secret, any opening, the way you were talking about the Fischer Dieskau recording, how you got the opening at a certain point in your mind? Did he give you any opening, either interpretively or strictly in musical performance, about the role of Don Giovanni, which is an impossibly hard role?
It is very hard. It's a very long role as well.
Yeah.
And it was, I mean, very much out of my reach at the time. He certainly did. I mean, he would, in the meantime, I had studied it to Kingdom Come, really. I was very, very well studied with it. And he would dissemble everything completely, and he would put it back together with an explanation why. And I mean, the structure of the personality of Don Giovanni is very strange, because he's not he's only the seducer. He actually is not very interested in the act itself. He wants the seduction. He's not the big lover. And I had never understood this before. He said, as soon as he has them, go. Doesn't matter.
All right. So, I mean, I think it's the hardest opera ever to direct. I've directed it. I've helped other friends work when they are planning productions, because it's something we can talk through endlessly. I kind of believe, well, there are so many things to think about him, but I think that Dona Elvira, he has been with him more than once. I think that that's the only woman, perhaps, that he's had a relationship with.
Yeah.
And
that's
when I work on that role, either with the man singing Don Giovanni or the woman singing Elvira, I implant that in their heads as a possibility. I don't dictate.
No.
But I do think that relationship is so different, which is why at the very end of the opera, when everyone is gone, she comes back and tries to save him.
Yeah,
sure. Which is very interesting. Did you ever sing Leparello?
No, it's too deep.
Okay.
I can't sing it.
Mm-hmm. And therefore, as the Don, did you evolve your own ideas about him as a character in terms of the relationships? Mm-hmm. Let's start, and then we have to go, unfortunately. Il faut partir, hélas, as they say.
Oh, I don't even know what time it is now.
But there are productions where Giovanni and Anna have a very particular relationship that is not simply that she's horrified by what he did, but that there's an animal physical attraction somewhere. Whereas
absolutely. She's deeply enamored of him. I mean, he has to be, there has to be some bull, but he never went there with her. Mm-hmm. So not because she's fighting him, but because he was not interested.
So he, at the beginning, very beginning, off stage, did he attempt to rape her? Did they have any sexual contact? Or maybe what you're saying is she was trying to attract him and he rejected her?
I think so.
Interesting.
It's a little bit the Me Too idea, I think.
So therefore, in your conception, Anna wanted him, but also maybe Elvira wanted him, and so maybe a lot of these women wanted him. How does that affect him as the seducer if he doesn't have to do any work? If in effect they want him?
Well, he's a floater, you know. I mean, he tends always to survive at whatever cost, and I mean, he usually pushes Leparello in front of him to take the blow. But I think it's all centered on himself, never on the other person. Can I do this? How much effort do I need to take Zerlina? You know, can I just breathe her on her neck and say, I have this very nice little house here with the white columns. What do you say? You know, how much do I actually have to work? And I've tried very often when I did the part not to touch too much. You know, if you all of a sudden grab, it doesn't work. Then you want the whole thing. But I don't think he does that. I think he wants to provoke and see how easy it can be for him to do it.
So he's very psychologically manipulative.
Oh, terrible. Yeah. Absolutely.
You see, this is why I love talking about this particular opera. I've worked on many. I don't say any opera is the best, but this is the one that I find even more than the whole Ring cycle. The implications of everything in Don Giovanni is the whole world. It's like Hamlet, Mr. Denmark. It's that similar feeling of we can keep going further into the play of Hamlet, not just the character of Hamlet, but the whole play, and find things the way we do in Don Giovanni. And yes, I'll admit Wagner's Ring cycle, we can go endlessly and fantastically, happily, deep. But that one is more wrapped up in the cult of Wagner, whereas this one is not about Mozart and Da Ponte. It's about the work they created.
Yeah.
And Michael, my friend, let's not wait another 26 years.
No, absolutely.
I thank you for this visit. I know that my listeners who maybe never heard you talk about your life were fascinated, and I know that they're going to start looking up your work. I posted, obviously, the recordings you selected from IDAGIO, and you're on a couple of them.
Yeah.
But it's not about you, but there are a couple, including your wonderful Papageno, directed by Colin Davis. And I frankly hope to see you live and in person somewhere in Italy, in Copenhagen and New York. But in the meantime, I thank you, and please be well.
Same
and
to you.
Keep up all of your inspiration and your creativity that's so infectious in the best possible way.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me for this talk.